All right, you guys, today on the wheel, we're gonna be going over a little demo on how to throw a plate on the wheel. To me, throwing a plate on the wheel is one of the easiest things to throw on the wheel, but it's one of the hardest things to get through the entire ceramics process. The drying out process, you run into issues with plates cracking, with them warping. It's something that we'll talk about a little bit more in class on how the proper way to dry out my plate. It's just slowing everything down and having a little more patience. But once you get the hang of it on the wheel, and like I said, I think it's one of the easier things to throw on the wheel. They're a lot of fun to throw and a lot of different directions that you can go with it. So I'll show you some of those in our demo we got going today. Starting out, clay amount. Size-wise, a good sized dinner plate, anywhere between 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds of clay. Today I'm working with 2 pounds of clay. I'm still going to start out with, this is already pre-wedged, I'm starting with my sphere shape. It's what I like to start with. Doesn't mean it has to be what you start with. With throwing a plate, my processes are still going to stay the same as far as my steps. I'm still going with my COPS acronym. I'm still centering, I'm still opening, pulling, and shaping. What the difference is a couple of those steps are just going to look a little different, and I'll kind of mention those as we go along. But starting out, I'm still going to center my piece of clay just like I always do, and just like with any clay, I want to get it warmed up a little bit. So I'm going to be doing my coning up and coning down. If you guys didn't quite get the coning up and coning down, go check out my intro to throwing video. That'll go a little bit more into depth of doing that. But just a reminder, the big kind of reason and purpose that we do it, it's not necessarily to center our clay, although I do feel like when I throw, it does help me center the clay a bit more, but it's more so I'm warming up my clay. I'm stretching it out. Example I gave was just like an athlete. When you're getting ready for your big game, or getting ready for practice, what's the first thing you always do? You go through stretching routines, you get your body warmed up. Clay, it helps with that elasticity. It helps stretch it more, but I can work with it more and work more easily. And also, and with this clay that I'm using today, this clay's a little more stiff than the gray clay you guys are all used to using. So it's a little, it takes a little bit more. It doesn't move so lightly and easily. So once I've got my piece centered, still going to do the same centering process. I'm going to do my coning up and coning down, get it centered. Once I feel it's good, I still want to go for that gumdrop shape. I don't want a big mountain, I want more of a gumdrop shape. Then from here, this is where our next step in the process, where we open and where we typically go down into the clay, it's going to change a little bit. This opening now is going to be me compressing the clay, and I want to push almost all the clay down and start widening it out. To do that, I'm going to use the heel of my hand. I've seen other students do it with their thumbs, they do it with their whole hand. I like the control of doing it with the back of my hand starting out, and that way I can use my other hand on top as a little bit more pressure and also support. And all I'm doing is just nice, slow, steady pressure, and you can see it starting to compress downwards, down and out. And as I feel that clay really start to stick on my hand, that's when I'm adding a little bit of water, and I'm opening that clay out to more dry clay. So once I get to where I'm about anywhere between 1/2 inch and 1 inch off the wheel head, some of it depends on what the overall design of your plate is going to be, I want to stop with this process, and now I'm going to go to my next step. So that was my open step. My pull is going to be a little bit of a combination. I'm not going to pull my walls up because I'm not making a vertical piece. I'm making a plate. My pull is going to be pulling and almost pushing the clay out. To do that, I'm going to switch over to my sponge. I have a little bit of moisture in it, but I've wrung it out. I'm going to start from the middle, and I'm just slow and steady gonna work my way straight out to the 3 o'clock position on your wheel. And you can see it's working that clay. This is how I'm going to get the width of my plate. And for this plate, I'm not gonna go all the way to the edge. I wanna leave myself a little bit of clay to work with on the end. And I'm gonna go back to the middle and do it again. Notice I'm not going super crazy fast. I'm going nice and slow and steady. Now, once I get out here this time, I'm gonna keep that same pressure and I'm gonna work my way back in. Couple reasons for this. Big one is it helps compress my clay, so it can reduce the chance of me getting cracks. But the other thing is it helps, you notice before I came back in, I had a whole bunch of bumps and rivets. That helps with beginning that smoothing out process. If you ever get that, and you just notice me compressing that middle, if you ever get that little bump in the middle, that little kind of nipple right there, all I'm doing is just with my finger compressing it down. Sometimes it gets too big that it's tough to press down, that you can just use your thumb and kind of either peel and it'll just pop right off and you can keep working. Kind of depends on how your clay's going. On that pull, I pulled a hole. I left a lot of clay in here. I started to get thin here, so I gave more pressure to my middle area and brought more of that clay to the outside. Once you get to a decent thickness on your base of where you're kind of looking at, things to keep in mind. I don't want to go so thin, especially if I'm working on one of the wheels that doesn't use a backboard. I still have to be able to cut this thing off. I would suggest, and this is the one time because I'm not a big fan of throwing on backboards, that when throwing plates, it's not a bad idea to throw it on a backboard because then I can just pull it right off. I don't have to worry a ton about having to cut and get this off. But even with that, I still throw a lot of plates without a backboard. I just end up leaving myself a little bit more clay knowing that I'm gonna have to cut this off the wheel. I've got more clay here that I could keep widening out. I've got clay here that if I wanted this plate to be this wide, I could get it there. But I'm gonna leave it about this side. This size, it's leaving me thickness to work with. It's also leaving me some in the walls that I can work with a little bit. Reason we just don't want a flat slab for a plate. Think about functionality. If I put peas on this dinner plate and my plate tips a little bit, they're gonna roll right off the plate onto the floor. I want to have something that protects it to keep my food from falling out. And that's where you can kind of get with the decorative side of it. So that's my pull stage. Now becomes my shape stage. Just like when we throw our other pieces and we talk about, this is the stage where rib and begin to start. Right here it's pretty beat up, it's bumpy, it's got a bunch of slip in the middle, but this is when I can start smoothing that out a bit. And I'm gonna go with that same process I did to open it up out this way. I'm gonna start from the middle, nice slow and steady, work my way out at that 3 o'clock position. Notice I flipped the rib over. Only reason I did that is because I pulled my plate sidewalls so high I didn't want to wreck them by continuing on that way. You can utilize, if your plate's big enough, I can utilize the whole width of my rib. Come in with that metal rib, do the same thing. Metal rib's nice because it'll help. It's almost like going from different grit sandpapers, where I'm going that real rough sandpaper to get all the heavy stuff off, and then I switch to that real light sandpaper to make my wood nice and finished. That's what you're going from a wooden rib to a metal rib, or going from one of those rubber ribs to a metal rib. Play around with your different ribs. They all can kind of do a little bit of a different thing. And it also helps clean up that thin layer of slip you got going on there. You can see it pulled off there. I'm not doing a whole lot of pressure. I'm letting the wheel do the work. Just like with anything you're throwing on the wheel, having patience with it. We can clean up those edges. If our edges are starting to get a little raggedy, we can compress it a little bit. Switch over and utilize my wooden tool. I can clean up that under edge, clean up that skirt a little bit. Clean up those sidewalls. If your rib wasn't quite the angle that you could get to it, utilize your other tools. All of your throwing tools, they just like in hand building, they've got multiple uses. And some of them, you just test them out. Creative with them. This might be where I add a decorative band, because that's part of my set that I'm doing, or what I'm looking for. So a lot of directions you can go with this. Big couple things to remember. Take it nice and slow and steady. Leave yourself some thickness, because you want to be able to cut your plate off the wheel. Also think about, am I planning on doing a foot of some sort on the bottom of my plate? If I am, then I need a little extra thickness, because I'm going to get this back on the wheel to be able to trim it. Alright you guys, I want to show you now how to get your plate off the wheel. In this instance where there wasn't a wheel available that I could put a backboard on it, or I just really don't like using a backboard when I throw. I like throwing directly on the wheel head. So I threw my plate on the wheel head. I allowed myself some space to be able to cut it off. I want to show you how I'm going to be able to cut that off. So first thing I'm going to do, because I need this plate to firm up a bit, that's when we're going to use our heat gun. I'm going to use my heat gun no more than a minute. I'm not trying to dry my plate out. I'm trying to firm it up a little bit. Looking for visually is for my clay to not have that sheen to it, that shine. That's saying that there's a ton of moisture left, especially on the surface, that it's got that almost leather hard look. That's what I'm kind of looking for. So because I don't have a backboard I can just take off, I'm still going to wire cut it just like I would always do. Before you start going through, because I've made this mistake, you have to go wider out than your plate is, because if I start going through now, my thumbs are going to, when I get to halfway across my plate, they're gonna stick into it. So make sure you're wide enough out. Ooh, and you can see how thin. Hopefully we don't cut through. You can see that ripple going through. So I didn't have as much thickness on my base as I had hoped. But if you're doing a plate, it's thin. So I made it through without slicing a hole in the middle of my plate, which is good. I'm gonna have a backboard at the ready that I can put my plate onto. One of the good, straight, flat, hard throwing backboards. Don't go with one of the wood backboards that's could possibly be warped a little bit, because when this get placed on it, it's going to dry to that form. So if you have a warped board, you're gonna end up having a warped plate as it dries. So I want a good straight plate to work on. I wanna have my plate, and if I can kind of show you guys here, I'm bringing my another stool and this backboard pretty close to next to me. It's within reaching distance of me, because of the size of the plate, I can't go in with pot lifters and try to lift this up. It just doesn't make sense. So I'm gonna have to do it with my hands. To pick this up, I'm going to grab on that furthest away from you side, and I'm gonna get my fingers underneath and lightly with my thumbs here so that I can just lift and gently place onto my backboard. As long as I'm gentle with it, I didn't do a whole lot of mess to, I got a few little marks, but you doing the heat gun helps kind of firm that up a little bit. So then you have it on your backboard, you're ready to wrap it, or if you need to do a little cleanup, although I would wait, if I have cleanup work, like I can see I have some clay balls and some rough edges I'd probably like to clean up. I would do that once this got more to a leather hard stage, so I wasn't just creating more clay balls and rivets. That would help out and work a little bit better. But so that's how we get our plate off if we're not on a backboard.